Welcome to Jewish Cinemathèque, where we meet some of the important faces involved with films that tackle aspects of the Jewish experience. Today I'm joined by documentary film producer-director Ilana Trachtman, whose work first came to my attention with her tender film portrayal of Lior Liebling, a young man with Down syndrome preparing for his bar mitzvah, and all the love and support that surrounded him. That 2008 film, Praying with Lior, totally knocked me over, and I've been following her award-winning work ever since. To date, Ilana continues to pile up awards, including an Emmy, with a total of 8 directing and producing credits. Ilana's newest film, Ain't No Back to a Merry-Go-Round, is just as powerful as Praying with Lior. It focuses on an important moment in American civil rights history, when in 1960, 5 black college students were arrested for protesting a segregated Maryland amusement park. And when the local Jewish community joined with African Americans in a history-making interracial demonstration.
Fun is where you find it.
We're going to have one swing at time at Glen Echo, the amusement park in Washington.
Glen Echo Amusement Park.
This park is segregated. You're not trespassing. Can I ask your race?
My race, I belong to the human race.
Oh, we were dying to get in there.
I really wanted to ride on the carousel. Why couldn't we go and have fun like everybody else?
We were some bold people.
I knew there was something better for me.
We wouldn't let our kids come to Glen Echo because not everybody could come.
We are Americans too. We support this country. We love this country.
The Holocaust radicalized me.
The fight for civil rights is much my fight as it is theirs.
That was the first time I had any social contact with a white person.
White people feel it would really be totally wrong morally for young white girls to be bumping hips in a swimming pool with teenage Negro boys.
I was surprised because the majority of the people picketing were white.
Whose picket line is this?
A group of demonstrators have just marched through the gate.
Got on the merry-go-round.
And into a restaurant here.
Then the brown shirts showed up. I would be picketing while there are these people here whom I fled.
They said, "What are you doing here, you want to die?"
And the guy spit on me.
Spit right in her face. She just looked straight ahead and kept on walking.
Last night's group was the largest number of demonstrators.
Congressman Adam Clayton Powell.
Stokely's first picket line.
A. Philip Randolph and Roy Wilkins joined the picket line.
Glen Echo gave me my baptism.
It dramatically changed my life.
Be sure to be at Glen Echo during the last week of the season.
Glen Echo Amusement Park.
One more time,
Ilana, welcome to Jewish Cinemathèque.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
I've always wanted to have you here. It's great.
Lovely to be here.
So, Ain't No Back to a Merry-Go-Round. That's an odd name for a film. Tell me where that came from.
It's pretty clunky. Yeah, I tried every single way possible not to name the film that. But in the end, that was the name because there's a Langston Hughes poem that he wrote in 1942, and it's about an African-American boy in the South, and he says, you know, where's the Jim Crow section on this merry-go-round, mister? Because where I come from, black and white can't sit side by side, but there's no back to a merry-go-round, so where's the horse for a kid that's black? And it was just so appropriate and so telling that that was the name of the film, and if it ever goes on Netflix, they'll make me shorten it.
It will be going on Netflix shortly. Looking forward to that.
Me too. This lifetime, because it's too long, you know, for a thumbnail.
Ain't No Back to a Merry-Go-Round, and the focus is on an amusement park, on a carousel, And you grew up close to that carousel. Did you go to that carousel as a child?
Yeah, I grew up about 20 minutes away. And when I was growing up, the park had closed, was long closed, actually. And my family moved there in 1979, and the park had closed in 68. So at that time, it was kind of this like magical urban decay, amusement park. It was clear that it had been an amusement park, but there were just kind of ghosts around. The Art Deco signage was still up, and the color scheme, it was like, this red, yellow, and sort of a sky blue. And even the roller coaster tracks were in the ground, but of course no roller coaster. And so it was incredibly evocative for me, and it was a place that I went to a lot, even like as a teenager with my friends to get up to no good. And
the carousel was still running?
And the carousel was still running all of this time. It even underwent a restoration about 20 years after that, but it was running, and it was an arts colony, and everybody in my family did something else artistic, and so we were there a lot. And it absolutely captured my imagination, and there were even photographs all around that the National Park Service had put up of the glory days of the park. And there were these beautiful black and white pictures of people in dresses on the merry-go-round. There was a picture of Navy men returning from World War I, I think, and they were throwing their girlfriends up in the air in front of the carousel. I mean, it was like, Norman Rockwell. And I was just completely obsessed with it.
And so close to downtown Washington, D.C.
Yeah, it's 2 miles from the Capitol.
So for you and people who lived in the area, there were warm, wonderful memories. But there was this story that wasn't being told.
That's right.
And that story was?
Well, that story was that it was whites only until 1961.
1961. So wait a minute. In the film, you talk about 1954, Brown versus Board of Education. Then you talk about Rosa Parks and Little Rock and so on. In suburban Washington, D.C., there was still a segregated amusement park as late as 1961?
And actually, there were things that were segregated even later because Maryland didn't have a public accommodations law, and either did Virginia. And so that meant that any kind of private business, even if it was open to the public, even if it was advertised as open to the public, could choose who they wanted to serve. And so there were movie theaters, there were restaurants that absolutely did not serve black people. Even in downtown, in downtown Rockville, you could go to a department store if you were African American, but you couldn't try anything on, because the idea was that a white person might not buy something if they suspected a black person had put it on. I mean, the Washington Redskins were the last team in the NFL to integrate. I mean, Maryland was, essentially a sleepy southern town.
So you had this relationship with this site. When did you discover this story and decide to then take it and make it into a film?
I mean, I really discovered it kind of accidentally, which is so bizarre given how much I thought I knew about the park. I loved the park so much that when I was engaged, I brought my fiance, now husband, to the park because I thought maybe we could get married there. And it was like, it was just a wedding venue. And we happened to run into probably the only Orthodox Jewish National Park Service ranger. His name is Sam Swirsky. It was the middle of winter. And I don't even know why that Sam told us the story of how the park had been integrated. And I mean, I was dumbfounded. I mean, it never occurred to me. I mean, I should have known, right? Because I was looking at all those pictures just like everybody else and just not registering that I was only looking at photographs of white people, and having grown up there, knowing that there were black communities and communities of color all over the county, I just didn't connect it. And, it was, it's like a certain kind of reckoning to understand that something that I had idealized was also, at the same time, a place of exclusion and rejection and pain for the black community.
So black children would come, peer in, and see the delight and the fun that all of these white children were having, and know that they were being excluded.
That's right. And the trolley, the trolley ran from DC out to Glen Echo. And so if you were black, you would sit on the trolley, and when it pulled up in front of the amusement park, you could actually see out the window. You could see the roller coaster, you could see the Ferris wheel, you could even see the fountain of the swimming pool, and no, you couldn't get off.
So as Jews, we know that there were many restricted sites early on into the 40s, into the early 50s. Were there signs that said no blacks allowed? No.
And worse than that, I mean, I don't know if it's worse than that, but there were, the radio jingle was so pervasive. I mean, anybody who grew up in the 50s in the Washington, D.C. area can sing it. It was just ubiquitous. It was everywhere. And also their print ads said, "Come one, come all." But it was a lie. And it was just, you know, it was just an accepted part of life. I mean, there's Deborah Swedenborg Willis says in the film, you know,
she was what?
She was 7, and she says, you know, like, that's just how it was. You know, Jim Crow is just a way of life. We knew that we couldn't go because we weren't white.
How did you go about finding all of the archival material that you needed to make a documentary film?
It was like being an archaeologist. I mean, it was an excavation process, especially just given the fact that you couldn't, like, you know, obviously you couldn't Google Glen Echo protest and have everything you need, you know, come up, or go into Getty and have these photographs come up, because it was just never like earmarked as history at the time, as say the March on Washington would have been, and so it was all following rumors and needles in haystacks, and really like getting very, very lucky. But it took years. I mean, the whole film took 10 years to make, and a part of that, it's not the only reason, but a part of that was just how long the research took, especially the footage research. And then even when you found things, you didn't really know who owned them.
Where did you find things? You went into
underneath people's beds. I mean, we're talking like there's so many stories.
Tell us a story of how you found one individual, without taking anything away from the film.
Okay, well, I had a little bit of a head start because this park ranger, Sam Swirsky, had been at the park for many, many years. And so over that time, people would stop by the park, and people who had been part of the protest would tell him about it. And so he was kind of like collecting what he heard. And in 2005, he put together a small reunion of anybody that he knew about who had been there. So I had a roster of a small number of people. But
you weren't at that reunion?
No, I wasn't at the reunion, but I had, you know, there was very good notes. I had those people's phone numbers, at least what had been their phone numbers, 9 years earlier. You know, I first started with the published record and just read every single newspaper article that came out from about June of 1960 until September or so of 1961, and a lot of it was like papers that are just totally defunct, and you can only find copies of them in church basements because they were just like local news. And everybody that was quoted, you know, I just tracked them down, and then I asked them who else they knew that had been there, and tracked those people down, and tracked those people down. So you know, it was just a lot of that, and all the greatest things that happened in terms of treasures in the film happened miraculously. You know, like if I hadn't talked to this person, they wouldn't have necessarily told me about this person, and they wouldn't have thought to tell me about this. You know, it was like that. I mean, like just as an example, something I got really lucky was I heard a rumor that in the 40s a cinematographer had made a promo film on spec, and that had never been used.
What does that mean on spec?
I'm sorry. Had made it like without getting commissioned, without getting paid. He had made a promo film of Glen Echo in the hopes that the owners would then buy it and use it for promotion. But they never had, and so nobody ever saw this.
And you found it.
So I found it, but that's not the best part. I mean, I found it, and it's beautiful. I mean, you know, it's just beautiful.
And it's part of the film.
It's part of the film. I've used it all over the place. But better than that was the fact that the man who made the film, his name was George Merican, was a professional cinematographer, lived a couple miles from the park, and so as his kids were growing up, he filmed them every year on the carousel. And so when I tracked down, of course, he was long dead and his children had nothing really to do with the collection. When I tracked down the young man, who's now middle-aged, who he had sort of given everything to, he had donated all of George's cans, which were hundreds, to the Library of Congress. And the Library of Congress had actually never cataloged them. So over the course of several years of a lot of calls and emails and pressure and whatever, I got the Library of Congress to take the cans out of storage, and I watched them all. And a can might have, a film of some, I don't know what kind of small town television show on it. It might have a family trip to the Grand Canyon, and then there would be like 30 seconds of a little girl on the carousel. And so many of the shots, the ones that are good because George filmed them.
That is quite a story. Yeah. You're a Jewish filmmaker, and one of the things that you discovered was that the Jewish community was there when these protests began. So the protests began with what, 5 students from Howard University? Why do you think they decided to take on the amusement park?
Well, I have to unpack what you just said.
Please.
Okay.
I threw a lot at you.
Yeah, well, first of all, I wouldn't say the Jewish community was waiting for them. I would say that there was a community across the street from the amusement park. The community's name is Bannockburn. That was built because there was so much redlining in the district that many Jews who had come from New York to work in the New Deal administration couldn't buy housing in the district because there were covenants against selling to Jews. So en masse, they bought a golf course and turned it into a housing development. By the time it was settled, it was probably about half Jewish. It was kind of like for like-minded liberals. That was across the street from Glen Echo Amusement Park, and separately from what was about to happen, they had been sending letters to the editor, writing to the governor, complaining about this stain that black people couldn't come in. And that's like throughout the 50s. Then in 1960, after Greensboro, black college campuses...
Explain what Greensboro was.
Oh, thanks. After the 4 students sat down at the lunch counter at Greensboro and refused to get up, that ignited sit-ins across the country, especially with groups of students that were coming from historically black colleges and universities. And Howard was no different. So a small group of Howard students were inspired and first went to the lunch counters in Virginia because DC was integrated, so to speak. It was de facto segregated, but it was integrated legally. So Virginia wasn't. So first they sat down at the lunch counters in Arlington, Virginia. And they were really savvy. They chose lunch counters that were part of franchises up north, like Woolworth's. And so they knew that economic pressure on Woolworth's
up in New York,
right? That if people started boycotting Woolworth's up north, that would affect everybody. And so within 2 weeks, they actually managed to get all of the Arlington lunch counters to capitulate because then they all had to. And so then they were like, where can we go next? And Glen Echo.
Were they troublemakers or just?
I don't think they were
driven?
troublemakers. I think they were really courageous, and I think that they wanted to start knocking down walls, and they had been so successful within just 2 weeks. It was like, let's take this on, and Glen Echo was so conspicuous, as a segregated target. I mean, there was a huge Ferris wheel that was taller than anything else, and so when they showed up at Glen Echo, they had alerted allies in the labor movement who had residents of Bannockburn who were part of the labor movement. And so word spread in Bannockburn that Howard students were coming. And so when they came, they were met by a whole group from Bannockburn.
And the reception?
So I wouldn't say there was immediate recognition and immediate love, but I think it was very clear that they wanted the same things and they were on the same side. And so this very unlikely but successful coalition was created right there.
Even, we had the story of the NAACP being created by Jews and blacks together. I mean, there's a history. And yet what you're saying is that for a protest, it was rare to see blacks and whites protesting together.
I mean, as far as my history advisors tell me, first of all, none of them had ever heard of this before.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, I know. It's things we think we know everything about the civil rights movement. It is probably the first time that an organized white community joined a black protest. So up until that point, you always had white individuals who would join something that existed. Even, in 1947, Bayard Rustin's Ride to Reconciliation, I think that's what he called it, sort of the precursor to the Freedom Rides, had white people who were part of it. But you never had a white community join, this is what we're going to do, all of us, until Glen Echo. And obviously, many things happened after that, but that was probably the first one.
And what you're describing is a majority of the whites were Jewish.
Yeah, that's right.
And committed to this. And then there's a little twist.
Well, I wouldn't say it's a twist as much as I would say it's the reality.
About the owners.
That's right. That, before we start lionizing Jews' role in the civil rights movement, I think we have to remember that there were also Jews who were upholding segregation, perpetuating segregation, like the owners of Glen Echo Amusement Park, the Baker brothers, Abram and Sam Baker, who continued the park's policy of segregation.
And when the protests began, you had another group that decided to join the protest and join the side of the owners.
That's right.
Led by a fellow named
George Lincoln Rockwell.
Who was?
Who was the founder of the American Nazi Party. And, this is just 15 years after the end of the war. And what's strange bedfellows, right, is that you have these Jewish owners who don't want to integrate the park, which they say is for economic reasons. They're afraid that white people won't come. Because also there's a huge swimming pool. 3,000 people can swim in.
Blacks and whites swimming in the same pool?
Right. There's 3,000 people could swim in that swimming pool. And so on the same side, not necessarily for the same reasons, but on the same side as those Jewish owners were the people from the American Nazi Party.
That's crazy.
It's crazy.
And you show this, and you found footage of them protesting and marching.
Can I tell that story? That's an incredible story.
Well, I want you to tell the story, but I also want people to see the incredible footage that you included in this film. Please. But don't give it away. We want them to watch the movie.
Well, this you'll see even in the trailer.
Okay.
So when I started working on the film, I didn't have any moving footage of the protests. I only had stills, and not very many, a handful of stills. And I had an audio recording of a conversation where the leader of the Howard students, his name is Lawrence Henry, is stopped on his way into the park by a security guard named Francis Collins. And Francis Collins says, "You're trespassing. This park is segregated." And he says, and Francis Collins says to Lawrence Henry, "Can I ask your race?" He's obviously speaking to a black man. And Lawrence Henry says, "My race, I'm a member of the human race." And in that conversation, Francis Collins, the security guard, is forced to say in every kind of overt way, "You can't come in because this is only for white people." And when that conversation happened, NAG, which was the Nonviolent Action Group, the name that the Howard students had called themselves, they invited the press. And so they invited a radio reporter named Sam Smith. And Sam was there and recorded that conversation. And in those days, unless something was incredible, they just taped over their tape always for the radio. And that conversation...
Expensive.
It was expensive, exactly. And that conversation was even shocking then. And so Sam did not record over it, he saved it. And when the park became a national park, he donated that piece of tape to the National Park Service. And they shared that with me. So that was all I had. But it was just, I had no image.
An audio recording.
An audio recording, which is lovely, but it's not the same. And so when I started working on the film and I was calling everybody that I could find who had been there, I spoke to one woman who had been young, 5 or 6 at the time, but her mother was one of the organizers, and she told me what she knew. 3 years later, she called me up. to tell me that she had found this little yellow Kodachrome box inside of another box that had been in her parents' basement, you know, and it said Glen Echo 1960, and did I want it? So I said, of course. I gave her a FedEx number, but I didn't, you know, it arrived and I didn't have any budget to just send that out to Color Lab. So I bought a projector, and I, you know, on eBay for $35, Super 8. Then
documentary filmmaker's budget.
Right. Then I had to teach myself how to use it. You know, watching those YouTube videos, and I literally took something down off of my office wall, like a movie poster off my office wall, in order to project it up there. And after threading it and getting the image to work, and I saw right away that I was looking at an image of the protests, I then like jumped up to turn it off because I thought, you know, oh my God, like, first of all, this is amazing, but also like I could burn it in a second, and sent it off to Color Lab with a credit card. And what came back was about 2 minutes of footage of the protests and the Nazis. And it was only 5 years or so after that in the edit room, we were just playing with things, and we discovered, because who would have thought it, we discovered that Polly's dad, his name is Ray Muntz, was filming at the same time that Sam Smith was recording. And his home movie and Sam Smith's recording synced. So all of a sudden we had like a perfect moment.
Sound and video.
We had sound and video, because what I should have said is that all of that video was all that film was silent. And this synced, so you can hear the sounds of the carousel in the background. You know, the lips are moving, and they're saying that I'm a member of the human race. So that was like incredible. And if you think about it, you know, for 60-something years, this piece of film footage and this radio recording were separated by 2,000 miles or so, and now, you know, bringing them together, it's like finding a primary text.
It's an amazing film. The film is called Ain't No Back to a Merry-Go-Round, and I very much encourage you to go look and see it. It's in festivals, and hopefully very soon it'll be streaming or at your local theater. Ilana, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.